Guga Foods and Sonny from That Dude Can Cook went head to head in a Pan Master versus Grill Master steak cook-off. And although Guga ultimately won, what's fascinating is how vastly different their cooking techniques were, even though it was such a close contest, as demonstrated by Albert, one of the judges.
I will finish everything.
But I am not a steak master like Sonny or Guga. In fact, I probably have only cooked steak like 5 times in my entire life. And I definitely cannot afford Wagyu ribeyes like they used. So using these Walmart ribeyes, I'll see which of their techniques is best for beginner home cooks. Starting with Sonny's recipe. So I'm just gonna trim up the ribeye to make sure that I just have the fillet, which is the middle section here, and the cap, which is the top portion. Then I lathered the steak in oil to act as a binder and for flavor. I'm using avocado oil because that's what Sonny used, but I'm sure any high smoke point oil will be fine here. Now the steak is ready for seasoning, and not just any seasoning. But this is Sonny's world famous rosemary salt recipe. And I previously made this salt when I tried out Sonny's brisket recipe a couple months ago, and it smelled and tasted delicious. But as you can see, the leftover rosemary salt that I have is completely wilted, so I need to make some more. So to a food processor, add rosemary, sage, garlic, lemon zest, and coarse salt and blend. And that's all there is to it. Now season the steak on both sides and the edges with the rosemary salt and also some black pepper. With that done, I have a carbon steel pan with some avocado oil on my Camp Chef Woodwind Pro Sidekick burner set on high. And once the oil starts to smoke, I put the steak in the pan for 3 minutes, flip it, and let the other side sear for another 3 minutes. Sonny's directions say to go for 3 to 4 minutes. But since the Walmart steak I'm using looks much thinner than the steak Sonny was using, I went with the lowest end of that time frame. Once done, put the steak aside to rest.
Bit uneven, but the crust is looking pretty good.
Now to the pan, add 2 halves of shallot and 3 cloves of garlic with the skin on, and cook both sides until they're brown. Then add in a knob of butter and brown that before adding in the steak with some thyme, and baste the steak until the internal temperature reaches 118 degrees Fahrenheit. And then this steak is done. Okay, so full disclosure here, Sonny's recipe was super difficult to pull off. Because steak cooks so fast, especially when you're cooking with such high temperatures, the clock is just super short, and there are a lot of components to Sonny's recipe. So mind you, and believe it or not, this is my very first time cooking a steak in a pan. And at about halfway through the cook, I noticed that the oil was starting to get like super smoky, like unnaturally smoky. And before I knew it, the smoke just blew up in flames. So the steak did get a bit overcooked, but luckily I was able to take the steak out, replace the oil, and finish the recipe. So a note to the beginners out there, if your oil starts smoking a lot, then turn down the heat. But the cool thing about this recipe is if you're comfortable pan frying a steak, then if you have proper ventilation in your house or your apartment, then you can totally do this indoors. No need for any special equipment. Another cool thing about this recipe is this rosemary salt that I made for it goes pretty much on anything. It is super versatile, so even after I'm done with this, I have so many different applications for this salt. Also, bonus points for the shallots and the garlic, because even though they added flavor to the butter when I was basting the steak, I'm sure they're gonna taste absolutely amazing when I pair them as I devour this entire steak. It's really hard to give this a fair evaluation because I eat brisket so often and rarely eat steak that eating this was like dying and going to heaven. This tastes amazing. The cap is definitely overcooked, but the fillet, oh my gosh, it's like textbook beautiful steak. And that little sandwich I made where I wrapped up that piece of roasted garlic inside of the steak and ate it, so good. So I am so down to do more steak videos in the future to mix things up, so let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this video so I know to make more. But man, Guga is in trouble because this steak is so good. And with that, let's go ahead and make Guga's steak recipe. So Guga seasons his ribeye with salt, black pepper and garlic powder on both sides. Then Guga gives an optional step, which is to tie the steak together with a piece of butcher's twine. Like I explained before, the ribeye we're cooking has two parts. And as the steak cooks and the connective tissues and fats begin to break down, these two muscles are going to want to separate. And because of the specific way that Guga cooks his steak, this could absolutely ruin the cook. Guga uses a charcoal kettle grill and a live fire, so it's super important to have the ability to move the steak out of the fire as quickly as possible. If the steak is not tied up, it will most certainly fall apart and burn. Also, Guga is using a newer model of the Weber kettle where he can safely swivel his grate around to get his steak out of the fire. But my grill is not only old, but severely beat up. So if I tried that same maneuver, it would likely be disastrous. So for me, and I suggest this for you at home, definitely opt into using the butcher's twine for this steak. Now the steak is ready for the grill, but before that we need to make Guga's spicy compound butter. So to the food processor, add a stick of butter, garlic paste, gochujang, Parmesan cheese, and a grated cured egg yolk. Now mind you, if you want to try to make Guga's recipe at home, just know that it takes like 5 days minimum to cure an egg yolk. But the process is fairly simple. Just place an egg yolk in a 50-50 mixture of salt and sugar in the fridge for 5 to 7 days. And then put the egg yolks in the oven at the lowest setting for about 45 minutes. Once the compound butter is all mixed together, we can start grilling. And like I said, we are using the Weber kettle. And we are doing this with a 2-zone cooking method. So I have hot coals on one side of the grill and the other side is completely empty. Put the steak over the coals for 30 seconds before flipping it over to sear the other side. Make sure to keep the steak away from the flame so it doesn't burn and keep flipping every 30 seconds until the crust is set. Then cover the steak with the compound butter and let it cook on the cool side of the grill until the internal temperature of the steak reaches 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Then rest it and serve. Okay, so although Sonny's steak is convenient because you can cook it indoors or outdoors, cooking Guga steak was so much easier for a steak noob like me. First of all, because the steak was tied up, it was so easy to maneuver if I had to flip it, if I had to move it to the cool zone, whatever I had to do. But more importantly, Guga's recipe had way less steps than Sonny's, especially during the cook. It was basically put a sear on the steak, put it on the side, add butter, and it was done. However, one thing I'll mention is that this compound spicy garlic egg yolk butter is very unique in taste. No, it's not unique at all actually. This tastes like a slightly spicy version of Cheese Whiz. It's kind of disgusting. So I'm definitely gonna have to get creative in order to use the rest of this butter, unlike Sonny's salt. And with all of those factors in mind, for both of these recipes, in terms of which one is best for beginner home cooks in actually cooking them, I think it's a tie. Because Guga's steak is much easier to cook than Sonny's steak, but Sonny's had ingredients that are really versatile, and also you can cook it no matter what equipment you have. But what's more important is the taste test. So I'm gonna see if Guga's steak can beat out Sonny's. Man, this is such a close call. Sonny's steak had such a beautiful classic flavor, and the garlic and the shallots was just such a nice touch. But the combination of steak and charcoal flavor can't be beat. Guga wins. Watch the next video on your screen where I try another Guga Foods recipe, this time deep frying an entire brisket in Wagyu beef tallow. And I'll see you guys over there.